So today I'm joined by Yati Khumalo. He's an award-winning editor and content specialist and an influential voice at the intersection of African fashion, music, pop culture, and creativity. He was editor-in-chief for GQ South Africa, editor at Apple Music across Africa and South Africa. I know they use the word sub-Saharan Africa, but I have my issues with it. And is now editor-in-chief of Billboard Africa. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You grew up in the US.
Yeah.
How'd you end up in the US?
So the backstory to the backstory. My dad was Zulu from Benoni, but he moved to Swaziland, I think in the early 80s. My mother was from Swaziland, and she actually studied in the US. So she did her undergrad to PhD in the late 60s, early 70s, which is wild. And incredible, but yeah. So then after she returned to Swaziland, she was working in the Department of Education, and at the time met my father, who was at the time working as a photographer. So he had his own photo studio, but he was also kind of shooting for the royal family and the government a lot. So their paths kind of intersected at some point.
A very big royal family.
Yeah, a very big one. So we were living there, and I was born there. We lived there until I was about 3 years old. But my mom got recruited by the UN to work at the headquarters in New York in 1990. So we moved there. So it was my mom, my sister, and I. Yeah, and it's strange because I have flashes of memory of Swaziland and living there at the time. But really, I'd say my consciousness really kicks in from New York. So that was kind of my first home in a way. But yeah, so I grew up there. I lived there for 18 years, age 3 to age 22 or so. Yeah, I moved back in 2008.
You talk about having kind of flashes of Swaziland. I mean, what flashes are like? What memories? So I asked this because I struggle with memories. I realized I struggle with any memories before the age of like 5. And it's always fascinated. And you meet people who have kind of memories of earlier. What does that feel like? What does that look like? What's that sense?
They're very small. It's like an image or two of something, like a market that, maybe sticks out of my mind. Or just flashes of like images, really. I think the tricky thing with those sometimes is that they get replaced if you go back. So we would come back on family holiday every 2 years. So I think it was 94, 96 or 92, 94, one of those kind of pairs. That'll come back and be like, I have a vague memory of this wall in this market in Manzini that just sticks out. And even now I go there, I'm like, yeah, that kind of feels familiar. But sometimes I think, is it familiar because of that holiday or because it's really a memory from pre-3? Who's to say? But just little like bursts. I think enough knowledge to know that, especially to tell my American friends that, we didn't ride elephants to school every day. And yes, there was running water and people had computers and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of mixture of like, I come from here. Am I really from here? I live there. I'm not really from there, but I am. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of mixture of that kind of experience as a child.
How do you reconcile that? Like just also in inverted commas, the level of development, like the way life flows. I don't want to kind of focus on the infrastructure, but just kind of the texture of life. Like as a child, we actually lived in Swaziland for a couple of years, and I started my first year of primary school in Manzini, Sydney Williams, in Cots Valley. But it's a different tempo. It's a different texture to life. And I can imagine if you're coming home on holiday every 2 years, and like you said, your formative years are in New York. So not just in the US, but in New York specifically, which, when you go home, if you go to Mbabane, it's the capital city, but there's a different texture to life.
Yeah. I think it was, and the caveat here is that I was a kid, right? So some of it was a lot of fun and adventurous in a way that, like, we had chickens at my auntie's house and we'd stay there with her and I'd chase the chickens around in the backyard because that was fun. And, I was 6 and 8 years old. And then we would be eating those chickens for dinner. So like, that's so crazy. Like, we just get them from the supermarket, which they also have. But and then I was a typical boy. So like, ha ha ha, let's go cut off the butt of the chicken. Like, I'm laughing about that for hours. So little things like that were fun. And in a way that I knew there was a difference, but it wasn't as far-fetched as I think maybe American friends would think about that. We were accustomed to the idea of a farm as an example, so it wasn't that strange, but it was just fun for me as a kid. I think looking back now, some of those things, I think it's just a smaller scale, and I think especially when you're kind of what I guess you could call it middle class, a lot of those things are not that different, My dad had his big blue Mercedes when we came to visit, he loved that thing. He's very proud of it. He would drive us around everyone would come. So it wasn't like life was that different in terms of the day to day. I think when you, as you say, you kind of explore a city like that and you kind of see, you're like, okay, this isn't very huge. Like, it's in my head, a 2-hour drive between Baban and Manzini, and it's like 40 minutes. Yeah. So things like that you're aware of, but I think the novelty of it and in the most positive way was actually kind of special. And where I grew up in New York in the suburbs was very conscious of the fact that this was a bedroom community for the world. So people came from all over the world to work there, live there, raise their families. So they're very big on kind of helping us spotlight and learn about each other's cultures and not just the rest of the world, but like directly. One of my friends did a project on Swaziland when we were in 3rd grade, I think. And I did one on France. She's French. So there was that kind of exchange, but respect kind of instilled very early on that helped us kind of negotiate those differences in a lot of ways. But some of the things, like I said, were fun. We visit my uncle, and he used to work in sugar. So next to a sugar cane farm, really. And we'd go and eat sugar cane raw. And that was wild and cool. Like, it tastes so sweet from the ground. That's crazy. So it was sweet in that way, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like living in an expat community also sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
In that, like you're saying, you're surrounded by the similarity of the common thread between all of you is that you are from different places in one place.
Yeah.
And and because you're all from different places, you're a bit more open, I guess, to understanding that there are different cultures, etc.
Yeah.
Than sitting within an American environment, which today is a different story, but is built, it's built on this idea of multiple cultures coming together for a common goal.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. It was actually quite special in that way. I think in some ways it was fascinating because the town next to ours was where a lot of the ambassadors to the UN have residences. The countries have residences there. So you get a lot of that kind of texture as well. Every now and then we go to church and there's a friend from the Swazi government actually, and the driver's dropping them off. Little things like that you're just conscious of people having roles in the world bigger than maybe what you saw day to day. But I think, as you said, the other part of that is just that mixture and that commonality that we're all here and we're all kind of experiencing a lot of the same kind of things. I think especially as children of these people, like the children of immigrants, I kind of love that perspective where, you're within that place. And, the term is a third culture kid, but sometimes that feels even limiting because there's so much more richness in that. But we're in that place and we're basically of that place as children, but knowing that at home there's a different language, there's a different structure, there's a home country that we have connections to, but sometimes we travel back to and we have accents like this, and our relatives tease us for saying our names incorrectly, like things like that. And then there we have to, we're teaching our friends how to pronounce our names and things like that, and they laugh, and like it's a whole thing. But being in that area, we were kind of all laughing at each other in the best way. And at the same time, learning about each other. I had a friend who was Czech. So, he called his mom by her first name, rather. So we learned to kind of do the same. That was their culture. And just different things like that, that learning from that kind of young age was so fascinating and so rewarding, that sometimes I'm in places where that mixture isn't as present and I'm a little uncomfortable, like, you know, and sometimes in practical ways, I'm like, okay, if there's a good mixture here, I know I can find a good Indian restaurant. Like, I know I can get like Vietnamese spices if I need to make something I want to make. Like that, I miss that mixture when it's not there, because I think I'm so used to it, and it came on from such in a formative time for me, that it's hard to not have that in my life.
You say do your father stay in Swaziland?
Yeah. He moved back to South Africa, I think in 98, 97, 98 or so. Yeah.
But when you were, so you were basically in New York with your mother.
Yeah.
Your father was still in Swaziland.
Yeah.
How does that impact in relationship?
Interesting question. I used to ask this a bit when I was young, because they remained married, but they were separated basically. And it was never felt acrimonious at all. You know, she never spoke about him negatively, but she didn't really speak about him at all, on the other hand. And I had a vague idea of who he was, obviously coming back here a few times, got to meet, spend some time together. But yeah, it was quite interesting, just that separation in a larger sense.
Because also for you, I mean, it's the relationship is it's a long distance relationship.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being a child, like it's never going to be like kind of them, like two adults kind of navigating and figuring out what it means, how it works, etc.
Yeah.
But for you as a child, where you don't have that consistent presence in your life, what was that like, and how did it evolve for you? Like, how did your perception or your view of him evolve also as you grow older, without him there present?
Yeah. I think the pair of trips that we took, and seeing him and kind of being here, maybe just filled in the picture a little bit for me in terms of what he was doing or who he was, or kind of that part of my family. And his other children, I have 8 siblings older than me from his side. So I got to meet some of them during those times, etc. It was an interesting thing, because I think it was so clear that we were staying there and he was staying here, and seeing them talk on those very short interactions was okay. But they didn't really speak much after that, especially. So I think as I got older, I guess got comfortable with the idea that maybe one of those childhood fantasies you have of like, maybe maybe he'll move in now, or whatever the case may be. Kind of just learned to let that go. And in a way that I think, given the situation, I think both of them did it right, especially my mom, in the sense of not really creating a negative image about him. You know, it was just, he's there, we're here, don't worry about it, really. So there was never really like a hard block for me, or a resentment or anything like that. It was just, he's just not part of this picture and part of my life, and okay. So that was, I think I reached that point around age 11 or 12. And that was that. And then it's interesting, because years later now, she passed away in 2004. I just turned 18. Now we're trying to make arrangements for that and kind of figure that out, and what we're going to do in the very short term, but then also for me and like my life at that point. And now we're finally in touch again, and now I'm speaking to someone who I thought I might go the rest of my life with not speaking to, and trying to reconcile a little bit of that. And yeah, that was interesting. It was like, okay, hi, like we're chatting on email, right? So hi, it's me, I guess. So you heard, how are you? And just kind of picking up a little bit of communication there. And then fast forward another 4 years or so, when it reached a point where I said, okay, well, maybe it's time for me to relocate, and come here, and I can pick up my life a little bit. And, but a lot of that would be, I need his help. I need his help in kind of starting my life here. And that was an interesting thing to wrap my head around. I think it just, that kind of reunion And here I am now at 22, and the last time you saw me, I was 8. And there's a whole life that I've lived that I have to try to take you through and explain. But there's a me, there's a personality, there's a everything, and the same in the other direction. So it was a very interesting kind of journey of filling in the gaps that I had about him being here, while also kind of kickstarting my life at the same time, and then trying not to prod too much into who they were, and being sensitive to that, but trying to ask as many questions as I could before, men of a generation, they'll maybe not want to talk about some of the more emotional stuff. So it was an interesting kind of learning curve. But yeah, it was an interesting thing where I wish in a parallel universe, there's a me who grew up with seeing them in love or whatever, and, understanding how that's even affecting me now in present day is very interesting. Going to make my therapist very rich. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of journey that's also layered with returning quote unquote home. And what does that mean for me, especially? And then finding myself as an adult and all those things. And, so all these things kind of wrapped into one ball of emotion, of learning, of self-discovery, at the same time of discovery of him and learning about him and just understanding all those layers at the same time. So yeah, I'm still unpacking that, I think, even years later. Yeah,
it's one of those that's it, lifelong journeys.
Literally. Yeah. Yeah.
What did you, as if, for example, a teenager sitting in New York, sitting in the US, from a kind of career perspective, what was the thing?
I wish there was a thing. In the sense of, African parents, right? So you're going to achieve at everything. If we were encouraged, let me use that term lightly, to achieve and to work hard and, get good grades across the board, which is great. And at the same time, frustrating. I'm a little bit jealous of those kids who were like, oh, I really love science. I hate English, I'm not an athlete, but I love science. I'm a science nerd. I'm going to go into science, or something else like that, where I enjoyed a lot of things. So trying to think about what one thing I wanted to do was overwhelming. And at the same time, I love to read a lot. So the things I would read, like novels and things, but a little bit of everything, but I would read everything. At one point I was just fascinated by the concept of earthquakes. So I wanted to study seismology for 6 months because I was like, oh my God, this is so fascinating. Like, you can hear the earth moving, you can track it. This is crazy. I wanted to do that. I wanted to work in property at some point. I wanted to do broadcast journalism and be in front of the camera or somehow involved technically. I really love that world. What else did I want to do? There were so many different things. I wanted to be a singer at one point. We grew up listening to gospel music, so there was lots of choral music that I would hear and understand, and I had a very good understanding of that. And I grew up singing in church and school, so that was a big thing as well. So then I got to a point okay, what does this mean? If I was a better athlete, maybe that would be the very clear, path or whatever. But even school subjects, I enjoyed most things. I didn't really like math, and I knew that, but I could do it, So if I think about a career, there's lots of people who don't like what they do, but they feed themselves. You know what I'm saying? So I think I really had to sit, and I did a lot of aptitude tests to kind of help figure this out. My mom also kind of was that's what she has done before in the early parts of her career. So, she was encouraging me to go try those, just take some tests, see what they reveal, see if that fits. And that kind of led me towards a communications umbrella, but really because I like people and I'm curious about their stories. I think some of that upbringing in that kind of very mixed cultural space informed a lot of that. But I think it's more than just understanding their stories. I think it's a bit of, let me help you make sure that you're understood, even in a school way, sometimes in a gossipy way, but sometimes also just in a helping friends understand each other. I would end up being the counselor between a friend and her boyfriend, as an example, and they both talk to me and I'm like, okay, here's what's going on. That would just happen naturally. I think the other part of that, though, that's what I tell people professionally a lot of the time. That's where these roots started. Also, I'm just nosy. So I want to know what's going on. And again, my therapist will say that, well, that's a defense mechanism because you had to, enter a room and make sure everything was okay. And if you could help, whatever, sure. Also just nosy. And my sister likes to say that she started my journalism career also because she's 10 years older than I am. I would want to hang out with her and her cool friends. And, so I'd promise to be in my best behavior after school and take me to the mall. Let's watch MTV. We weren't allowed to. Things like that, so I'd be like, I'm cool. I won't tell, I promise. And then we'd get home and then mom would get home. Like, Mommy, guess what we did? Like instant playback. So she used to call me a VCR at that point, or camcorder, for people of a certain age who will remember that tech. But yeah, so there's some nosiness. There is some curiosity about people. And then I think kind of pulls all that together. And then I just found writing easy. Teachers would say, you're going to have to write this a few times, a few different drafts. And I'd be like, I'm happy with my first, and you are too, mostly. So that came very easily to me. We did read everything. I always just say Time Magazine to Sweet Valley High and everything in between. H.G. Wells during the summer. Stephen King when I got a little bit older. Things like that, everything. So all that kind of coalesced into, okay, let's do something in media, whatever that looks like. But yeah, I still envy those kids that were like, they knew from an early age, because there's a part of me that still wants to try a bunch of different things. And I think even some of the brands that I work for has helped me kind of get a taste of different worlds through that thing. So yeah, it's a fascinating kind of kaleidoscope of.
I actually love the way you framed it. Like I've never thought about it that way in terms of let me help you get understood. So, because to a certain extent, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So mine has always been, I'll help you tell your story. So this act, this thing that I do where I talk to people, it's let me provide a space for you to share your thoughts, right? But the other thing, the three parts of it kind of all say, yeah, it makes sense that you are where you are and doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Because you need curiosity, and I'm a big believer in curiosity. Like I've realized, with hindsight, like I've realized that because I'm curious about lots of different things, that's actually what's helped me kind of build a life or do the things that I've done. Just because it seems interesting. It may be random to somebody else, but for me, it's like, oh, okay. I want to know how they do that. And then having an understanding of a wide range of topics.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who I was speaking to. I can't remember who I was talking to on the podcast recently. And we were just talking about kind of being jack of all trades. I think it was Msaki. And I was saying, that the quote that's out there is incomplete. But, some of these spaces need you to have a basic understanding of a lot of different things.
Yeah.
As opposed to in-depth understanding of a few things.
Yeah.
And both of us having worked in magazine, particularly when you're editing and you're reading a wide range of content, wide range of stories, you need a basic understanding to know whether it hits the mark or it misses the mark. But you don't need to be an expert on it.
Yeah.
You just need to know enough to go, okay, this is not misleading. I'm not being cheated out of anything here.
Yeah.
And there's valid information in there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a level of empathy for sure that I think on a person-to-person level that has helped me do exactly that. It's understanding not just what people are saying, but kind of in between the lines of what they mean, and even showing them that you understand what they mean. That helps me throughout life in general, but definitely career. I think another part of that that's informed that for me is my upbringing to a degree, where you learn to adapt to a lot of different situations. And this is not exclusive to third culture kids or people who grow up in circumstances like mine, where you're surrounded by a mixture of people and backgrounds. But I think it certainly gave me that, from that perspective of, I'm curious enough, but also surrounded by so many different things that I get to experience, and get to adapt to. And I think of a chameleon in that way. You learn not necessarily how to fit in, but just how to take on certain characteristics or even behaviors for whatever reason, even if it's just short term, for an evening. I'm going to a friend's bar mitzvah, as an example. What do we do with that? So now I know for the next one, I can make challah bread from scratch myself. I mean, it tastes delicious, but it's a thing where I can take on those colors. And there's so many other situations like that I found myself in, that I've adapted to, that has helped in a lot of ways. And so professionally, it just kind of carries on in that way. There's a base level of knowledge enough that then I can dig deeper in a conversation, in an interview, in a story, that's fascinating and incredibly broad, and sometimes a little bit scary, because the other side of that coin is, how do I get back to being green? And what is my green when I've adapted so much that I can almost have a conversation with anyone, even professionally, to understand their world and be curious about them, and to show them that I'm, understanding who they are and what they're about. How do I find the me again within that? When do I snap back? Which is again an ongoing question and a journey. But yeah, and there's like I said, it's very useful. It's very enlightening. It's very human. It's very great for building connections that last, and it's very honest. This is not like I'm not adapting colors because I'm trying to be fake or trying to show that I can be everything and everyone and fit in everywhere. That's not the point of it. It's more about, let me find that connection and use that connection to help find understanding. So that's very advantageous, and it pays off a lot of ways, in many ways. But the other side of that coin is a little.
I've never. Well, it's been a while since I thought about that. That kind of, how do I get back to me again? But also because I kind of found me, and I've had enough time to a certain extent, shape the world, to be able to accommodate me as me. Having kind of gone from that space where I was being the chameleon and kind of making everybody feel comfortable, and then getting back to space and kind of going, okay, what is me? I've probably spent the last, the minimum 10 years kind of going, actually, this is how I show up in the world. This is how I operate. And so I've forgotten about the kind of that side, that challenge.
Yeah.
And I can imagine now, in your role now, where you're now actually going across the continent, and you're dealing with the whole world, because of, you're dealing with a global brand, a global platform, and dealing with a continent that we all know is extremely, extremely diverse.
Yeah.
Everybody else is only starting to figure that out now. And serving as that kind of bridge between it. So I can imagine, like right now, it's another shifting and trying to find balance.
Completely that. I think the one benefit that time brings is you learn to discover and hold on to what makes you green over time. If you'd asked me at 28, I would have been 1,000 things, and a lot of them are true, and they're parts of me, sure. But that was so external, because I maybe hadn't yet defined what those things are for me. Where I think with time, you kind of learn to filter out really what isn't working, or what you're not really, doesn't align with you anymore, versus what does. So now it's. I'm not saying that I've answered that question exhaustively at all, in terms of where is my green? Can I be green all the time? Because we do have to adapt to things. Life will do that to us. But now I think it's a little bit easier to kind of get back there quicker. And I think, especially as you're saying now with this adventure I'm on now, it is being that bridge and showing, using the maybe two very good and popular lenses of music and genres of music to show that there's so much more than just those two things. And I think maybe my unique experience in being in both worlds and understanding both worlds to a degree and being here now and even learning for myself, because there was a learning curve I had to go on, and translating that story and making sure that both sides are understood in that way, with some imbalance because we have to do a lot more teaching, which is unfortunate, but that's just the context we're in. But that's a challenge and a privilege, but a challenge in the sense of there's so much to teach and it's almost where do you begin? Thankfully, music is a nice kind of easy way to do that. And luckily, it's a lot more borderless now than it was even 10 years ago. Yeah. So that helps. And at the same time, it's a learning curve for me too, as I said, because, you know, first there was a America, South Africa / Swati thing there where I had to learn things and discover and kind of find my footing. But then the same thing with the rest of the continent, you know, there's so much in common, but there's still discovery to be made, even for me. And the last, let's say 5 or 6 years, I've been really focused on that. And that's been really fantastic. But also just interesting and it's a privilege. It's a challenge. Sometimes but it's a good one. And I think finding those paths of understanding, similarly to how I grew up with them, makes it a little bit easier for me to approach that and say, okay, cool. Like, let's go here. Teach me about your sounds. Who are the players here? What's the story? What's the context that these sounds and experiences come from? And then allow me to help you share that story and that meaning with whatever platforms I have at my disposal. And to do that meaningfully and in ways that we can keep, that don't, you know, end up in someone's garage or in a library, but are accessible everywhere. And it's strange to think about that because I think it's so parallel to my own life that I almost couldn't script or plan that necessarily. And it'd be hard to replicate that kind of journey, but I'm incredibly grateful for it. And then because of that, it comes from such a natural place, an easy place in that way. And then you add the curiosity and the nosiness, and I'm like, okay, I guess this is what I'm meant to be doing. Yeah.
When you landed in South Africa, as what, 22-year-old?
Yeah.
What did you do first? What was your first job?
So this was an interesting thing, right? Because I had to wait for Home Affairs to help me sort out an ID, birth register, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it took a while. My father at the time had worked for QuickBooks, the national office for years, run by, I think it's Intuit was the name of the company at the time. Yeah. And then decided to leave to kind of still do that kind of same work, but independently. So he would have legacy clients who were like, I don't want to upgrade to the new software. I like when you come here and help me fix what I need to get fixed. So I'd spent the first probably 4 months or so kind of tagging along with him. And we'd be driving all around Joburg. We'd be going to farms and who knows where. I mean, now I have to almost retrace those steps a little bit. So I'm like, oh, I have been to this place before. But that's what we would do. So I worked with him for a while doing that, kind of helping support him. And he used to use me and my accent as financial support to help collect unpaid invoices. So I'd call and be like, this is the such and such law firm, you know, I'd pick an American sounding name and it would just this on the phone. But especially then, because I was speaking a lot faster, I hadn't slowed down. So it worked. So I did that for a while. And there was a point where I was thinking, well, while I'm waiting, there's a job opportunity at the QuickBooks office. I could step into that, make some money now. But I knew I wanted to keep studying. I'd started studying a little bit before that. And I had done TV and radio production and marketing, and I knew I loved it. I knew it connected with me so quickly, and I really enjoyed it. And I said, well, I don't want to give up that dream. So I applied to UCT and got in and decided to move to Cape Town. And it was either Rhodes or Cape Town, but I was like, I need the industry around me, especially if I'm in a new country. I want to be as embedded as I can. And there was just more industry from what I saw at the time in Cape Town. So yeah. So I moved to Cape Town in 2009 to study. Hadn't been there ever. I think I knew one person who'd been there. UCT just writes a great brochure. So I have somebody to thank for that in marketing. But yeah, I moved there, I think it was the 3rd of February, 2009. What's that? 17, 18 years ago now, this month. Yeah, and I dived into studies. I dived into campus societies. I think I was in 5 that first year, running 3 of them the next year. Get that back to about 2 the year after. Got internships off campus in town. I worked in retail, anything I could do really. Partly to make up for quote unquote lost time. Partly to, like I said, embed myself in my new home. And also just to kickstart the career really. So yeah, it was a bit interesting journey also. Every now and then I'm like, where's QuickBooks me in the parallel universe scheme of things? What's he doing now, you know? But yeah, that's what took me to Cape Town, and then internship after internship led me eventually to GQ. I was there for 14 years before I moved to Joburg. So it's been
What did you study?
So I was doing, at UCT, it was media production. So they have production streams that you can apply to get into in your second year. So I did print media production. It was the most writing focused. They had a radio one, they had a digital one, they had film writing, other ones as well. But I think that was the one for me. And it was basically journalism and everything that happens after in terms of media production. So sure, you could, all the journalistic technique you need to research, interview, et cetera, et cetera. And then let's talk about publishing. So let's learn Adobe InDesign and how to actually put together a page layout or a magazine. That was one of our projects. Let's learn some basic photography skills so that we can also edit and choose photographs from that perspective. Which is fascinating because, again, it was an immersion. You couple that with my experience from the student newspaper, which I joined day one, when we were using the same software. So I got to class finally the second year. I'm like, okay, I know how to do this. But great, because I have more practical time to do it. I joined the Cape Town Globalist, which at the time was a student-run magazine, like current affairs magazine. So I joined that for a while. I did UCT radio as a newsreader on the afternoon drive show, especially in the second semester. So that taught me public speaking, but also research and delivery and like conversation with the radio host and all that. I joined the UCT choir and then managed that for the next 2 years, as a committee chair, and that was people management. That was a little bit of ambassadorship in terms of getting the choir more publicly known on campus, getting us to perform, getting us profitable. Yeah, it was a lot of different things that kind of complemented the study so that I could kind of go into whatever I wanted to do with some experience behind me. And I think because there was gaps, I graduated high school in 2004. This is now 2008, 2009. There's life experience that's happened in there, but I was like, I don't want to wait to get experience. I don't want to keep everything on campus and then walk out into the world and be like, now what? So I worked in retail. I worked at Jenny Button, Cavendish, Claremont for about 6 months. I did an internship at a publishing company owned by what's now Arena Holdings. So I had an internship there that turned into a freelance writing position for about 3 years. I interned at GQ at the end of 2010. It was a 2-week internship, but so beneficial and just so great to be embedded in a space where I got to see how everything worked and kind of found a little lane for myself as well in terms of like, I love studying copy editing on campus. There's copy editors here. They're involved in everything. That looks cool. And an easy way for me to slot into this and, kind of get to experience everything. Yeah, and that kind of just blossomed. And then I worked in contract publishing for a while. I worked at, I ran a travel magazine, and then we did a magazine for SALGO, the local government association. And then I got a call about a job that opened at GQ, and I went for an interview in 2011, and started there in 2012. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you found kind of the best way possible for yourself. Because even with Cape Town, I mean, I've lived in Joburg for a very long time. And, as a Joburger, I see this place as the engine, as the heart, where stuff happens. But Cape Town, particularly within kind of media, comms, etc., it often feels like a very kind of closed space. But if you do it right, if you do it the right way, which is essentially what you did, is you can actually build yourself and build the experience, and experience different parts of the industry within Cape Town. Because once you're kind of in, it's easier to kind of navigate the other spaces. Whereas in Joburg, you can be in here, and when you're out, it's nobody else thinks about you because there's so much going on.
Yeah. I think for me, there's some extra factors in there. One is that, and one of them is maybe me, and one of this is a situation. When I say the situation, one thing nobody tells humanities students is that in terms of like job support, career finding, those structures aren't built for you like they are for other faculties. Leave medicine and some of the science things separate, and engineering, there's maybe more clear paths there. Let me use commerce as an example. There were commerce job fairs on campus multiple times a year. Businesses coming in, they had relationships with the faculty to do these things. Those paths were, a lot of these companies have graduate programs that we all know about and love, and they're fantastic. But those relationships are set up. Despite UCT being in Cape Town, in a very lifestyle media hub, really, of the country, if not beyond, a lot of those things weren't set up formally. So I was like, but what do you mean? Like the magazine houses are 20 minutes from the main campus and 2 minutes from the arts campus in town. How do you mean that you don't have a relationship? What do you mean you don't have a career fair or anything for them? How are those people not coming here to speak to us in at least one of our lectures? Yeah. And to be fair, some people were ad hoc basis or guest lecturer, but that formality wasn't there. So I think some of my Americanness and that little maverickness I had to say, well, I'm going to find out. I'm going to knock on the door. I'm going to ask people. I had a friend who worked in HR at that contract publishing company, so I asked her to ask around, and she did. And she said, we never really had an intern, but maybe they could use one because somebody could write cheaply and get paid a little bit, and that could be cool. Let's see. So things like that, but I was vocal about it too. The GQ internship came because I knew friends of mine had done it, and I asked them, are they still looking for interns? Can you connect me? Like, I wasn't afraid to knock on those doors. And I think that that's a thing that I had to learn for myself, but something I've tried to pass on, especially to people who are studying similar paths, or even now, not even studying, but just keen to get involved. You almost have to make some of those paths yourself. And I mean, there's, as far as I got at GQ and other places, there's a list of about 40 other publishing companies that I reached out to, that I never heard back from, or they said no, or whatever, which is fine. That's how it goes. It's funny now to connect with some of those people on LinkedIn, and I'm like, I remember you. But so there's that. I think that's a factor for sure. And not that I'm unique in that, but I think at the time and my own kind of just eagerness, that helped. The other factor is, that curiosity again that kicked in. But I think I was just like, this is my only thing. I don't have a safety net. My dad was around, but he was getting older. I had to make it work for myself. Mom was gone. My sister lives in another country. Like, it's me. I've got to make it. So I've got to make this thing happen. And that's where the other part of that maverick spirit came in, which I wish we as Africans weren't so apologetic in terms of how we show up, because we're so talented, but sometimes we come in with this thing of like, oh, we're small, like please help us, or please just give me a chance. I'm like, show up big. That's what
it's also partially an immigrant spirit.
Completely.
Like you're saying.
Completely.
Because I mean, you're coming home, but was it really home? Like you have a connection to it.
Yeah.
It's part of your heritage.
Yeah.
But it's not a place that you lived. And I mean, I drove from Maseru to Joburg. It's not that far. But also I couldn't go back.
Right.
Because I had disappointed my father to a certain extent. And I had said, okay, I need this. I need a change of scenery. So not succeeding or not building something meant having to go back and saying, yeah, maybe that wasn't a great idea. Can I get my old job back? Which as a child, you don't want. You don't want to have to. You don't want a parent to be able to say, "I told you so," or just give you the look, like, "Where were you going?" So it forced me to kind of make do, because I had a safety net, but I'd kind of taken it away from myself partially.
Yeah.
And if you look at immigrants anywhere in the world, when you land in a place and there's no support network, you basically have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
That gives it's a different approach, a different attitude.
Yeah.
I think also sometimes you're willing to accept the deeper holes and the harder times. Like you're able to
completely
to navigate your way out of those because you know that there's no other option.
Yeah, I had to build from scratch, quite literally. If at certain points, if you ask my dad what I did, like he could point to the magazine. As to what I did specifically, no clue. I had to make it work, and whatever it was going to take to make it work, and that's what I did. And it's funny because it shows up in different ways. Where then I was working at GQ, and I had interns of my own to manage, and some of them were my former classmates. And this is after I even dropped out and didn't finish the degree because the money wasn't there. And part of me was thinking, you shouldn't be my intern. Like, why is this not you next to me instead of, But another point was like, well, my approach had to be different. My I guess desire to a degree was different. And the stakes were bigger for me from an early point, and I had to make it work and had to keep making it work. And what I did to get there, I had to keep doing to keep it. Yeah, so that gives you, like you said, it gives you a whole different kind of drive and momentum and things that you're willing to endure or sacrifice to get to where you need to get, because you can't get in. There's nothing else. Which is wild to think about, but it's true. It's exhausting. I didn't expect this many gray hairs so soon, but we're here. But it's something that, looking back, I think also is a like, wow, I did that. I knew nobody when I got there. I booked a Ricky's taxi from the airport because it was the only one I could find online where someone would be holding a sign for you that I could afford also. So little things like that I'm like, from nothing to where I am, what I have, who I am now. There's parts of that journey I would edit and maybe rewrite if I could.
Well, you always can.
But it's yeah.
And also you were at GQ and you spent, your kind of journey at GQ and, in inverted commas, your rise to the top was also a very interesting time in the country and the development of society, particularly as Black men. Because, we were in competing publications later on. But also when I think back to, I mean, I was a Destiny man for 4 years, but even kind of my evolution and how I had to evolve how I showed up, which mask I put forward, was tied to this also kind of flux and expansion within my community. And, you know, I remember now all of a sudden like wearing suits or wearing ties, and because then the black dandy became a thing.
Yeah.
And then kind of leaving and evolving from there, and then kind of looking back and looking at you and still at GQ, where that was starting to evolve a little bit. Because now, like when I left magazine, I'm like, I don't have to dress like that anymore.
Right.
And I'm doing this now, and now I just want to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And it being kind of internationally owned and Cape Town based must have been really interesting, because it would have been probably slightly different if it was Joburg based. And I was Joburg based, so even how we approached the same thing was slightly different because of context.
Yes.
But you're battling that context, that side, because there's also a Cape Town, let's call it a Cape Town view and perception of, you know, frankly, blackness.
Yeah.
And the differences in conversations between when you're talking to a brand manager who's based in Joburg versus a brand manager who's based in Cape Town. So yeah, like I can imagine the kind of navigating the, you know, that was the perfect grounding for you to be able to do what you do now and be that comedian.
So there's a lot there. I think I'll start with this, is that I think my own desire to be understood and to find that bridge within myself versus my home, my new home, led me to brands that were international, because then I could understand the brand very well from the international perspective. And while I'm adapting that locally, I'm also learning to adapt myself. So I think that was one of the things that brought me to some place like GQ, where I was like, okay, I know this world very well. I've been reading this magazine since I was 14. I know very well what the GQ concept is of a man showing up in the world, what that looks like, what that feels like compared to other, even magazine brands. That was very clear in my mind. So using that as a lens for me to even adapt and acclimatize was maybe unintentional, but maybe kind of subliminal or subconscious. That was the thing. I think then being in Cape Town for me as an individual, also with that Americanness again, I wasn't afraid to be the only one in the room in many ways. And that's Cape Town, and still is now, as we all know. But I wasn't afraid to show up at a restaurant, to be there, to be present, to be visible. Because I worked for it in a lot of ways. But I was like, I'm here. I'm going to show up. And I'm going to show up to an event. And the person checking me into the event might think I'm somebody else, because there's only 2 black names on the list at some point. And, you know, so, oh, I'm not going to use the name, but, oh, somebody else's name. I'm like, no, it's the other black guy. And it's uncomfortable and it's horrible sometimes. And even at the grocery store, I'd be like, no, I don't work here. I'm wearing red. Pick and Pay's colors are blue. Don't ask me. Why are you asking me? And I would stop and ask that question. But I wasn't afraid to ask that question. And I wasn't afraid to keep showing up in that way. Not just because of the American thing, but I think just, I work for this. I'm here. Similarly, that showed up professionally, where I was like, look, I'm here. I'm representing this brand to the best of my ability. I'm putting everything into this so that when we're doing storytelling, when we're interviewing people, when we're trying to, I guess, help shape an idea of masculinity, even fashion, but I think just this idea of self-image, how are we going to do that is effective, that is fitting the time, but that is representative, but in a way that's real. and not like kitschy representative. I think obviously that was very important for me, but I could also just see that kind of playing out in some of the things that we would do, or stories that we would tell, or maybe old stories that we would tell that we need to adapt. And it was interesting, like you're saying, because we're based in Cape Town, the audience is mostly Joburg. Because who's wearing a suit in Cape Town? Like, unless, you know, you really need to, nobody was doing that. So that was a very interesting thing. I think for an aspirational, quote unquote, brand, being based in an aspirational, quote unquote, city, it's almost like you're building this image of what your whole life should look like with that kind of as a stencil, and then trying to apply that to everything else. But I think, as you're saying, the timing was interesting because a lot of that was happening at that time. Now this is post 2010, the World Cup, people are coming here more, they're seeing things are building up, we're building up things as we go. Everything's kind of just doing this in terms of matching on a day-to-day lifestyle level other places in the world. You know, I used to come in every now and then, I'm like, oh, I miss like a good New York bagel. Just give me a bagel and cream cheese and a black coffee. That's my breakfast. And there were like 4 bagel shops that opened around me in Cape Town. I really just want a slice of pizza today. I don't want a whole pie. Like, just give me a slice of pizza. A New York slice pizza shop opened like 2 blocks from my apartment. I was like, oh, okay. Like those gaps are not really gaps anymore. But a lot of that was starting to happen at that time, where things were starting to almost be on par. You know, so trying to, and being in the midst of that was very interesting, you know, especially as you said, kind of playing out in a fashion space where are we finding ways to maintain our identity? Are we assimilating too much? Is everyone kind of doing the same look with our flower lapel pins and our, you know, sure. And maybe, but again, this is at the time when pre-Instagram really, in terms of influencers.
Yeah, early days.
Early days
Instagram, but it was mainly photographers, and like I joined then, and it was mainly photographers and stuff on.
Yeah, it was Beyonce showing a photo of her In-N-Out burger, like nothing like we're doing now. And it was Batty B at the time, like things like that. It wasn't, we had bloggers who were kind of becoming more and more maybe influential or recognized. And I think that was a kind of turning point of, let's say, the democratization of lifestyle media, where it used to be these big brands, you know, kind of using their index finger to show you what was next, and maybe with an offshoot being an online thing, but slowly having to open up the hand to use other platforms, social media, and I don't like to say compete necessarily, but coexist with individuals, as we know now, who were doing the same kind of thing and representing themselves and their point of view and their style, and very slowly, early days back then. But that was the beginning of that time, and it was like even watching that evolve was, and how do we fit into that, was fascinating. Difficult, but fascinating. And I think, you know, kind of removing that veil of how things happen, and ultimate authority that these brands had at that time. It was a interesting time to be there. Almost a sunset of some of that authority to a degree. Not all of it, but I think in terms of you're the only one on the mountain range. Now there's a whole summit of people from all backgrounds, of platforms of all kinds, that are telling similar stories. But yeah, that time was fascinating, especially then.
Because I joined Destiny Man 2010, towards the end of 2010. The year before, I had done Black Magazine, which was created by a group of guys, but it was created as direct competition to GQ. I have my views on it. I had my views on it, even though I was the founding editor. But going to Destiny Man, and I had a very specific agenda that's tied to kind of how I was raised. Even the people that employed me didn't know my agenda. And I was very strategic with how I pushed it and how I presented it. And so we used to spend quite a bit of time looking at platforms like GQ and going, there's still, the brands are still kind of telling us, right, this is where we're going. But being rooted in in a city where we have a place and we take ownership of those spaces. We're less. I can't think of the word right now, but we kind of worry less. Like, this is my space. This is my city. This is my world. This is what I'm doing. And the traditional and the modern and contemporary both have a place within my world.
Yeah.
And I live it on a daily basis without thinking about it. And I always knew that that's how I could set the publication I was working for, apart from a GQ, apart from a Men's Health, etc. And so it was a very interesting time, because my line was my job was to reflect the lives of my readers.
Yeah.
And the demographic was diverse, but the larger portion of it was Black, but not just Black. So a lot of, when I interacted with brand managers or even some of my colleagues who are of a lighter hue than I am, they saw Black as a monolith.
Right.
Whereas I'm going, okay, there is Xhosa, there is Zulu, there's diversity in people. Somebody who was born of Swati and Zulu heritage versus somebody who was born of Tswana and Xhosa heritage, there's going to be differences. And I'm going to take that into consideration when I'm looking at stories, when I'm looking at editorial. But I'm also going to recognize the commonalities, because I live it, and I've grown up within those spaces.
Yeah.
And that's my circles.
Yeah.
Like, this friend Xhosa, that person is Zulu. These are the people I live with. It's not, it's not a theory.
Right.
Right. I don't have the in-depth knowledge, but I have enough knowledge of the culture, etc. And that's what also made it kind of really interesting for me, because I'd watch what everybody else is doing. And a part of me would go and be like, if I went in there, I could so turn that thing around. Like I'm watching them struggle. And it's like, you're actually struggling for something that's a small tweak.
Yeah.
And I know we're not going to get into it, but we've had the conversations around being the person in there and now trying to navigate that.
Yeah.
And now trying to go, how do I exert influence and impact with these very unique constraints? And ironically, I had the same thing within a business that everybody would assume was not a problem, not a hassle.
And how do you do that in service to an audience and maybe a generation, which is shifting their priorities slightly in terms of that, is maybe more externally focused and leaning and wanting to align with things outside of what they know or where they grew up or whatever. How do I do that in service to them that's accurate and authentic without being condescending? You want to be empowering. You don't want to be dismissive of other parts of their life, but how do you, people are still trying to unravel that today. I know I am, and it's a, how do you do that authentically in a way that serves them without, while giving them the respect they deserve and their whole stories and their whole identity. It's a complex thing. I think especially for any media brand, really, lifestyle media, but especially when you're an international brand trying to adapt that into something that's relevant on the ground, such that it's a conversation, it's a community rather than a mandate.
And in an industry, in a sector that was undergoing disruption.
Oh yeah,
at another level. I mean, I always say, like, music industry was like ground zero for technological and digital disruption, kind of in the early days. with Napster and all of these things. But they've kind of found their way back to something, to a semblance of stability, right? But the media industry, for me, was the second sector that was totally disrupted. And we still, I still consider myself part of it, but we still have not found what is, okay, this is what we're doing now. Like, to this day, we're still having the conversations and having the debates and trying to figure out, what does the future look like? And now we're sitting at a time when there's a greater conversation around a return to analog, a return to the way things were, but you can never go back, right? So it's, even if, like the records or vinyls have been revived, but it's not necessarily revived. They've just taken on a new life,
right,
a new way, and they're occupying a new space. And we cannot predict, like we literally cannot predict, what the future looks like. So how much do you think about that, considering you're still smack bang in the middle? It's easier for me because I'm kind of on the fringes. I can dip my toe in. I can be like, let me write something for you. It's for a website. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I can do it. I can contribute to a magazine. I can do that stuff. But it's just a dip in and out for me. You're still firmly in the middle of it.
I do think about it. I think there's some things that I miss, some things that I'll cherish that I wish we could still do more of. Some of those days of printing and the very nerdy conversations we have around bringing something print to life and into existence was a lot of fun. I'd sit with my art director and we would debate two different hues of blue, and it was so specific and so niche, but it was great. I really enjoyed that process. And, there's something about this thing that was a concept and is an idea that you're putting together, or it's something on a screen or something that you've printed out on A4 paper in the office, to then get like a fresh magazine back and you're like, oh wow, like it's real. It looks great.
Sorry, mine was, which way does the person face?
Yeah.
On the pages.
Exactly.
Like having that, first of all, like discovering it, and then going, and then looking at, and I find I still do that when looking at something on a screen, looking at something from a graphic perspective. It's like, okay, what way is the person facing?
Yeah.
And sometimes I've flipped stuff around because I'm just, it doesn't look right.
Yeah.
They're looking off the page, and it's like, but it's a screen.
Yeah. But it's the same thing. And so I miss some of that sometimes. And I think it still has a place. I think the industry has been trying to reimagine what that looks like. Do we print coffee table books? Or this is a collectible thing. Do we do quarterly? Do we do special occasion kind of printing? Like, what's the answer? I think everyone's trying to figure that out still. In the same way that we were told in the late 90s and early 2000s that every office would be paperless because we have email, and baby, I still get paper cuts now. So things like that I think are part of that journey. Like you're saying with vinyls, it's almost the same kind of feeling. But I think now when I think about it, how are we showing up? What conversations are we empowering? As kind of the core. Everything else we can build around that. But if the conversation is like this, let's do that. Let's bring some of this brand sizzle and glitter to this conversation that maybe hasn't happened in this way before. Is it a video? Is it an event? And if it's an event, why is it an event? What are we doing at the event that maybe we haven't done before, or we found a niche for, or whatever? Is it a video series? Is it something small? Is it a TikTok? Is it whatever it might be? So I think that for me right now, it's more what is in service to the story, to the person behind the story, or to the context that we're trying to share. What will translate that best? Is it something fun and disruptive? Is it working with a photographer? Is it just showcasing a photographer's work as an example? I'm thinking now of this one photographer. I wish I would remember their name, who did a shoot with I want to say it was Nike, or he actually bought the sneakers or whatever, but like put locos and townships in these fantastic sneakers and shot them there at home. So cool because it's so
Oh yeah, I saw that.
so relevant to day-to-day life. And these are people who are backbones of the communities and everything, but just giving them that moment of fun and style and, you know, everything that they already do naturally and kind of exposing that a little bit. Is it something like that? Is it some other kind of event, process, or gathering? Or is it just let's bring, now as an example, in music, let's bring artists together to just have dinner. Sometimes they see each other running around stage or backstage at a festival or something, or they work together, you know, one-to-one or a small group on a song or on a video. When do they get the chance to just like sit and chill and exchange ideas and, you know, just connect with each other and just, how was that thing you went to? Or do you know someone here? Like, so if that's what I'm doing, great. And things like that I think I can live without some of the old things. I'll never forget those two blues and, you know, should we go serif, sans serif for this font? How should we punctuate this? My art director now wants me to change the first letter of the sentence because he wants a nice drop cap, and a letter I doesn't give a nice drop cap as much as the letter A does. Like those things keep showing up for me now, surprisingly, in small ways. But and there's places for those things too. But I think it's what are we doing now to help the mission? And is that partnering with the right people to do something really cool? Is it, you know, it's an ongoing question. That still fascinates me now. And I think there's lots of opportunity there. I think you don't always need an international brand, but if I have one, I'll use it. And I think, again, for me, that goes back to, let me use this as a bridge, something to educate, something to celebrate, something to even highlight those third culture kid stories, because so many of those are so relatable. And I think the African diaspora in particular is so massive in that way that it doesn't even need to be an overseas thing. It can just be a continental thing. And it can just be a in the country,
yeah.
You know, wherever your home is and where you live now, and that intersection, it's such a common thing, but that's rarely seen in any kind of media representation. So how do I tell that story? Maybe I speak to musicians who have that story and help them tell that. Musicians here, some who live abroad, and unpack those stories, because that's, you know, so if I'm using the brand and service of things like that, then I'll worry a little bit less about the evolution of the media thing and more that we are shining a light on something that hasn't been spotlighted before. Then that's important. Then I'm like, okay, there's value in this, in whatever format it takes. There's still value in that.
I think we got caught up on platform. We got caught up in vehicle.
Yeah.
When what's important is the story. Being communicated.
Yeah. And
when you boil it right down to it, everything is storytelling. So it's, what story are you telling? What story are you highlighting? What, you know, story putting a spotlight on? And story, like you're saying, be anything, but there's a thread, there's a core to it. How you actually, the vehicle you use to communicate it impacts or influences what portion of the story you cut out.
Exactly.
And how you frame the story as an entry point.
Yeah.
To the broader conversation.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, if it's TikTok, you're using TikTok to go into the fuller conversation. So when I post about a podcast episode, I have a clip on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because I'm still old school. Like, I want you to be able to look at the TikTok, but if it feels like there's a broader story that interests you more, then go into the full episode. So it's literally just it's a gateway, and it's a vehicle for communicating the broader story.
And it's funny, I haven't thought about this in a few years, but I used to say this quite a bit. We know how to do that naturally as individuals, even in our tech era, smartphone era, whatever you want to call it. We know with our friends, I'm going to send this to you on WhatsApp, or I'm going to send you an Instagram reel or a TikTok on whatever platform, or maybe we actually need to talk about this. Let's meet up. Or I can send you a voice note, or I can call you, or I can whatever. We know intrinsically based on whatever we're trying to communicate, what the context is, what to do, and how to share that message best. And when we need to get together, or when when it's a FaceTime video call, as an example. Like, I haven't seen your face in a while. Whatever. We know how to do that. We've learned how to do that. Same thing can apply to us as storytellers, as media practitioners. What's the context of the story? Where does it fit best? And sometimes it is a gateway to a larger format, a larger portion of a story. Sometimes it's just there, And I think for me, it's been a journey of, let me respect that too. Maybe it just needs to sit right here, and that's okay. This is a story, it's a 2-minute thing, or this is a 20-minute thing, or this is a 3-hour event. Fine. That journey is very interesting, and I'm figuring out where to put what is an ongoing thing. Sometimes it might just be, wait, we start here, but actually, if we dig a little deeper, there's a wider story here that would be so fascinating to tell. But we know how to do that, and I think it's not being afraid to do that and to make those decisions as they come up that I find really interesting now. Yeah.
What's exciting you across the board? What's exciting you right now?
What is exciting me, I think, right now is the idea of potential. When I say potential, I mean, let's use music as an example, especially from the continent. If Amapiano, Afrobeats are gateway genres, there's so much potential for us to share so much more of ourselves with the world. And use music as that avenue to share more of our context, identity, who we are, what informs the color choices that we make in our fashion, why those 3 colors represent Ghana, as an example, in a way that's very true and authentic, and not just a pastiche that you find in a t-shirt that is African themed in like a French shop or a shop in London or something. But really, this is that red because this is why. That potential is exciting because it's, right now for me, it feels unbound and limitless. There's so much of that we know exists. And I think maybe now, for the first time in a long time, if not ever, I think we can put a lot of that storytelling into people's hands. We don't have to wait for someone to come shine the light on us. We can do it. And at the same time, a lot of those people want to come and shine a light. When we launched Billboard, it was exactly that. There was so much excitement and so much support from the whole Billboard network globally to show the rest of the world what we know to be true here. So I think that excites me for sure. I think the potential for that in terms of how it affects musicians and their lives and how they can build livelihoods where they maybe never had the chance to, especially for a young generation, is fantastic. I think that's exciting. I think that's exciting to see what they can do and how they can change the world through that. And the world might be their neighborhood. The world might be the Grammys. I think the potential for that to change those institutions, and we've even seen some evolutions there as an example, which is still ongoing, a lot of debate around that, but things are happening. That excites me. I think for me, it excites me to be a part of that in my own little way, to continue to be that bridge, I think, and to use my own kind of story and my perspective and my upbringing and my journey so far to find those stories that are undertold and to help them and the people behind them be understood. That's exciting. And there's so many different directions that can go in for me. I think I'm excited by giving myself space to discover what that means, what that looks like. Again, not being held to format, Does that mean I write a TV show one day that does exactly this? Maybe. Is there a book? Probably. I should start writing the book. Is there more than that? Probably. And I think I'm excited by giving myself the freedom to discover what that is. Especially this year. I'm turning 40 this year, which is the thing. And I'm excited about that to a degree. But I think using that also as a partial kind of springboard to say, give yourself the freedom to discover that, to discover new ways of storytelling, and to find something that maybe I've always wanted to do but never have done before. That's exciting. Yeah, that's what excites me now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. Please leave a review and subscribe. Check out the show notes for links to the guest, the podcast, and myself. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.